Hey, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Good to see you. You ready for the big snowstorm? Yeah, here we go. Let's get another one, right? And real quick, of course, the USA has a better hockey team than the Canadians, and we won the gold medal today, just in case you wonder. So for all of you that were recording it and waiting to go home and watch it, I apologize, but I thought we could throw that in there. I would take us back to August of last summer because at that point in time, our daughter Savannah and her husband Andy and our grandson Colton moved away from here and decided to move all the way across the country to Oregon, which we're kind of still trying to figure out and go through, right? It's a little bit of a tension thing for us because we love our kids and especially we love our grandson that we don't really get to see. But they moved out there to be closer to Andy's family, which we fully understood the reasoning behind that. Over the Christmas holiday, we had a chance to go visit them and to go hang out with them. And we actually rented an Airbnb where they lived, or close to where they lived. They're in the Sandy, Oregon area, if you've ever been out there before. It's a little southeast of Portland. We saw photos of the back, looking out the back windows of this house, and we're like, oh, this looks really great. But here's what we got to look at every single day when we woke up. This is Mount Hood, and maybe if you've been out there before, you're very familiar with Mount Hood. Now, if you've been out there before, I'd never been out to Oregon in my life, but I went out twice last year, so, that's kind of weird that happened this late into my life, but it's a beautiful place. It's at the shore or the coast one time, but then in the mountains to see them. And if you've been there before, when you go to Portland or you go around that area, they say they're like on a good day, you can see 5 of the major peaks in that area. One of them being Mount Hood. The other one is this one, which is Mount St. Helens. Little do you realize that these are all active volcanoes, right? And if you're familiar with Mount St. Helens, you know what happened in May of 1980. It erupted, it exploded, and left all kinds of destruction and devastation all around that particular area. Now, scientists actually knew something was up with the mountain. There were tremors that they were beginning to experience. The pressure was increasing. If you go back and look, there was actually a bulge that was starting to show up on part of this mountain. The thing was, they just didn't know when it was going to happen. They knew it was going to explode. They just didn't know when it was going to take place. They just knew it was coming. But then when it came, it was a violent eruption. And again, left all kinds of devastation all over the place. Hey, you know what? This is what happens in our relationships. We'll say, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm okay, and then it seems like out of the blue, whoosh, we violently explode like a volcano, and all kinds of destruction and devastation is left around us. But here's the deal. This doesn't actually randomly happen. What we do is we store stuff up, we ignore it, we minimize it. Sometimes we will stack up certain things that have happened in that relationship. That pressure begins to build inside of us. And then one day somebody didn't take out the trash. Or one day somebody doesn't do the dishes. Or one day somebody shows up late. And it's in that moment that pressure builds to the point where it just explodes. And you and I erupt like a volcano. The thing is, though, it's not that we have an anger problem. What we have is a pressure problem. And that pressure just builds up day after day after day. And maybe that pressure is connected to childhood grief or trauma or something we faced as a child. Maybe it's work stress. Maybe it's feeling unappreciated. Maybe it's being exhausted. It could be marriage tension or unresolved conflict. But that pressure builds and builds and builds until one day again, like that volcano, it explodes. Today, we're going to continue this series called Relationships, 4 simple shifts we can make in the relationships we have. We're talking about any kind of relationship we have. And what we're hoping to do is to strengthen and heal and protect, and in the long run, make these relationships last a lifetime. And so last week, as we started, we talked about how the biggest issue with the relationships we have isn't really the other person, it's actually me. And so we talked about shifting from me to us. We talked about shifting from selfishness to empathy. This week, we're going to talk about how do we keep from these things building up inside of us till we get to this point to where we explode. And so I want to spend our time talking about how we shift from reacting to responding in healthy ways. Now, many of us, let's just be honest, reacting is our default mode. right? Like that pressure just builds up inside of us. We do our best to hold it in. We do our best to not let it out. But something happens we don't like. We get mad. And that pressure, we have to let it out. And we do. We hit that tipping point. And again, we explode. I love what the poet writes in Proverbs 29. Fools give full vent to their rage. And you're like, that's not me though. I'm not a person full of rage. I'm just trying to address an issue that has come up between me and this other party. But we don't realize how quickly we react. We don't realize how we react. And we don't realize the harm that we cause because of how we react in that moment. So we have to remember that reacting is emotion driven. We react because our emotions are in the driver's seat of this relationship. And when we react, we don't think. We just say or do. And so those reactions, they're immediate, they're defensive, they escalate. Well, and of course, we all know in the end, we end up regretting exactly what takes place in those moments. When we're driven by our reactions, there's certain things that we do. So I just want to share a few of these, and as I'm going through these, maybe some of these will connect with you. Some ways we react, we increase the volume. Like if we can't win the argument, you try to win the decibel level. You ever been in an argument and someone says, why are you yelling? And your response is, I'm not yelling, right? We raise the volume and we get a little bit of forceful. So for some of us, we increase the volume. For others, we use, here's one of my favorites, we use absolute language. We say things like, you always, or you never. That's absolute language. And if you're married, nothing unifies you more than how accurate always and never always are, because we're trying to prove that we're right. So some of us use absolute language. Here's a good one. We text bomb. Some of you, have you seen this video before? These two dogs, they're barking at each other. The gate moves and opens up, and when they're face to face, they act like they're best friends. They close the gate and they go after each other again. This is kind of what happens when we text people, right? We say things to people in a text message we would never say to them face to face. But our thinking is, but this feels good. I'm getting to share all my main points right here. This is how I feel. Hey, they're going to understand my emotions behind what I'm writing. There's no tone in text messages that we send to other people to say, hey, this is where I am. And what I have experienced is that when you text somebody thinking they're going to understand where you're coming from, it actually usually escalates the tension that's already there. And so maybe some of us, we react by text bombing. Others, we withdraw. We don't get loud. We get silent. We don't explode, but we disappear. We shut down. We disengage. We avoid. Avoidance feels pretty peaceful, doesn't it? In some ways, it feels like, hey, this is pretty good, but it's just delayed detonation. We're still going to explode at some point, even though right now we may be quiet. So maybe some of us withdraw. Here's a favorite of people today. We vague post. You ever read something like this on social media? Some people need to learn to respect others. Maybe you've posted that before. As soon as you put that, the person that you're talking about already knows that you're talking about them, right? And so does everybody else within that situation. But we vague post thinking, hey, I'm going to let this out and kind of let the world know what's going on. This is how we react to those tensions and conflict in the relationships that we have. And maybe one of these are your default mode. And as we went through that, you're like, yep, that's me. I'll let you know, I'm kind of an expert in probably 2 or 3 of those in my relationships. But it's hard, right? Relationships are tough. Relationships are hard. And oftentimes we end up reacting when those tensions arise. Why do we do this? These are people we love. These are people we care about. These are people that we know, maybe people we live with. And yet this is our response. We react when there is tension and conflict there. Scientists call these actions the amygdala hijack. And that in every high-stake conversation there are like these 2 players that are going at each other in our heads. There's the amygdala, and it's this small little piece kind of in the middle of the brain. It's like the emotional fire alarm. It senses threats. It's fast. It's instinctive, and it's there to do one thing, to help you and I survive, right? But then there's the opponent, and that's the prefrontal cortex, which sits right behind our forehead. This is the logical part of our brain. This is the part of our brain that has empathy, like we talked about last week. Reasoning, long-term planning. This is the part that says, hey, don't say that dumb thing that is right there on the tip of your lips. It's designed for our connections with other people. But when we feel threatened and there's conflict or tension with someone, that prefrontal cortex kind of waves bye-bye because the amygdala jumps in and takes over and shuts down our prefrontal cortex. The amygdala says, we ride at dawn. But our prefrontal cortex is like, hey, can we put a calendar invite in so we can get together and chat through this? They function very differently. And so when we are hijacked by our amygdala, we say these 4 words that are probably some of the most famous words in our conflict. I didn't mean that. Truth is, we did. The truth is, we just didn't filter what we were saying. And so this battle is always going on. And so we have to learn to shift from how we react when that conflict is there, when those tensions are finding their way into our relationships, to this place of restraint. And restraint is strength under control. And there is no better example of this than a guy named Jesus. In the book of Matthew, chapter 27, we read this. Now Jesus was standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. Are you the king of the Jews? The governor asked him. Jesus replied, you have said it. But when the leading priests and the elders made their accusations against him, Jesus remained silent. Don't you hear all these charges they are bringing against you? Pilate demanded. But Jesus made no response to any of the charges, much to the governor's surprise. We kind of set the stage for this interaction that Jesus is having with Pilate right here. I mean, in a few short moments, Jesus is actually going to be crucified and put to death. But before this, like he's being falsely accused. There's public humiliation that has taken place. There's this relational betrayal with him because of Judas, one of his disciples that he had chosen. There's political manipulation by the religious leaders. This is mob that is screaming for his death. If anyone has a right to escalate a situation in that moment, it would have been Jesus. He had every right to do that. He could have defended himself. He could have dismantled his accusers. I mean, Jesus could have called down angels from heaven and smited all the people that were there causing problems. He could have done any of this, but he doesn't do that at all. He remains silent. Look what it says there. But Jesus made no responses to any of the charges. Restraint is strength under control. If we look in the book of John, we find a little bit more information about this interaction that Jesus is having there with Pilate. And right before this, we read that Pilate has had Jesus flogged. The soldiers have actually roughed up Jesus. Jesus has been smacked and hit in the face countless times. And so finally, Pilate goes back to the people, and he's like, he's innocent. Like, I can't find anything wrong with him. He's not guilty for all these things that you've said he's guilty for. But if you know the story, the crowds cheer for his death. And so Pilate looks back at Jesus and goes back to him. And here's what happens in John chapter 19. He took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him, where are you from? But Jesus gave no answer. Why don't you talk to me? Pilate demanded. Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or crucify you? Pilate's like, talk to me. Give me some answers. He's like, do you know how powerful I am? I have the power that I can let you go, or I can let this mob win, and I can have you crucified. And Jesus calmly responds and says, you would have no power over me at all unless it were given to you from above. Everyone else here is reacting, right? Everyone's reacting. Religious leaders are reacting out of fear and envy as they lead this mob that is there. Pilate's reacting out of political pressure that he is experiencing. And so that's why there's this trial. That's why there is this torture. That's why this execution is going to take place in the not too distant future. And yet Jesus doesn't react. He's very composed in that moment. And even when that pressure, and I can't even imagine, even in that pressure, is building inside of him. He has this incredible restraint. And I'll tell you why he does. Because he knows what's at stake. How do you respond when the pressure is building? Does your tone change? Does your volume increase? Do you go for those open wounds that have been there in that relationship? Do you use phrases like, oh, really, let's go there? Or you think that's bad? Or I guess I'm just the bad guy? Or, oh, yeah, remember when you? Maybe some of those sound familiar to us. And I'll be honest with you, it feels kind of good and justified in the midst of a conflict to bring those things up and to say words like that and to act in that way. But all that is doing is escalating this tension that is there. We're tearing down the other person. We're reacting in that moment. And yet what we need is not this reaction. What we need is restraint. Now, let me talk about restraint for a moment because I think we can hear that and we have sort of an idea of what we think restraint is. Restraint's not being silent out of fear, okay? It's not avoiding another person. It's not suppressing emotion. Sometimes people think restraint means we're not supposed to be emotional. That's not what we're talking about here. Doesn't mean suppressing those emotions. It's not pretending like you're not hurt or taking all the blame. It is, again, controlling tone and volume and not opening old wounds. It is strength under control. But the most important piece to restraint is, like Jesus, that we remember what's at stake. And what's at stake for you? Your marriage, your relationship with your kids, trust that you have with others at work, your family connections that are important to you. Like when we're clear at what's at stake for us, we will handle conflict differently. And we will begin to think, hey, I don't want to react in this moment. Even though that feels good and that's the step I want to take, I don't want to react. I want to make sure that I have restraint. What does restraint look like? Let me share with you a few thoughts here, okay? Here's one idea. Slow down your body. When emotional escalation is happening, we have this physiological thing that happens to our bodies. We tighten up, our breathing shortens, our voice actually tightens, our heart rate spikes. Why does it do that? We're ready to explode, right? We're ready for the top to blow off, and so we can just explode in that moment. But restraint can be as simple as just one simple breath, loosening our shoulders, reminding ourselves like, hey, this is the moment where I usually raise my voice. This is actually the moment where I just need to soften what I am saying. Calm your body and calm your words. Slow down your body is a good way to begin to develop restraint. Another idea, separate hurt from harm. Sometimes the reason we escalate is because we feel hurt. And we have to understand not every hurt is danger. And not every disagreement is a threat. Restraint is asking myself, am I under attack or am I just uncomfortable? That's a huge question to ask. Separate that hurt from harm. And then last thing I would say here about restraint is choose the long term over the short term. Again, I just said this. Sometimes escalation feels really good within the short term. It feels good to yell. It feels good to speak your mind. It feels good to show all kinds of gestures and let your inner volcano explode. But when we do that, we lose a lot. We lose respect. We'll lose friendships. We'll lose marriages. We'll lose family connections that we have. Restraint is thinking about the long term. Like, I know this feels good right now, but what's the long-term effect of this? Because in marriage, you can win the argument and you can lose the intimacy. In your friendships, you can win the conflict and lose their trust. Here is Jesus, who in that moment could have said, I'm tired of this. This is not right, and you're not speaking truth in this moment. And I could just say, hey, this is exactly what's going on. He could have dismantled them. He could have done so many things there in that moment, but that would have been him thinking short term. Jesus knew what was at stake. And what was at stake was the redemption of all humanity. What was at stake was this opportunity to save you and me. He understood his purpose. He understood what was at stake. And so the restraint for him was choosing the long term for us. And maybe the one thing we need to hold on to when it comes to restraint is remembering what's at stake for you and me. We can shift from reacting to restraint. But how do we shift then to respond in a healthy way? I think the answers come out of James. James chapter 1, verse 19. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. We did a whole series on this back in the fall on the book of James, and we talked through this passage, and we said, hey, I wonder what all of our relationships would look like if this is the way that we treated every single one of them. That if every relationship you and I had, that this is exactly how we functioned, how we thought, how we worked, how we did it. There would be so much less pain and hurt and brokenness in our world. So how do we use these words and actually put them into practice? Well, I'm going to share with you, based on James 1:19, 3 steps to take. And I think these are actually next steps that we take one right after the other. Here's the first one. Listen. Sometimes you guys, we need to hear the same thing 2 weeks in a row to understand it and to kind of like, oh, that might be important. So last week we actually talked about active listening, right? If you were here, you remember that. We talked about being an active listener. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but just kind of do a recap. Listen means stop talking. And you listen to the person who's speaking to you. That you're not in your mind thinking, okay, I hear you saying that. I'm going to open up this old wound. I got this rebuttal that I'm going to come up with. I've got this story I'm going to tell you. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being an active listener for someone else. Because the reason many of us will explode is because we've never truly listened and just stopped, and we're active listeners to what someone is sharing with us. That's our first step, to listen. Here's the second step, pause. Take a pause. Slow to speak. I love this because it feels like James is 2,000 years ahead of his time. He's like, listen quickly, but be slow to speak. Don't let that pressure that's building up inside of you and ready to explode at a moment's notice, don't let that happen. Be slow to speak. Pause in your conflicts with other people. What does pausing look like? I think it means to literally stop. That when you're in the midst of this conflict, you're in the midst of this tension, you're in the midst of whatever's happening with you and this other person, this argument you're having that you literally just stop. Some of the recommendations I've seen almost say the exact same thing, so I'm going to share that with you. That recommendation is to pause for 10 seconds. That's like the worst 10 seconds in the world right there, right? Like, we hate that. It feels terrible. And when you're in the midst of an argument, you're like, I need to pause. And it's quiet for 10 seconds. It feels like an eternity. It feels like 10,000 years are passing by in that moment. But pausing for 10 seconds could save you 10 years of resentment. It could save you thousands of dollars of counseling. It could save that relationship. Pausing is saying, I need to stop for a moment. I need to catch my breath. I want to come back to this when I'm clear. And I'll even add this. Sometimes that pause isn't just 10 seconds. Sometimes it's saying, hey, I'm going to need to step away from this. And you know what you do? You step away. You get your phone out. You don't text bomb, but like you doom scroll, right? Or you're like, I need to go for a walk. Or I need to go cook dinner, or whatever it may be for you that gives you a chance just to kind of clear your mind. And you're not doing that because you're trying to avoid what's happening. You're doing that because you want to say, hey, this is really important, but I need to take a break right now, and I need to pause so I can clear my head, and so we can come back together, and we can work through this together. Actively listen, take the time to pause, and this is what is really, really important to our relationships. We have to learn to repair them. Sometimes we might be great at listening for a little bit, or maybe be great at taking a pause that we just never come back, but in the end, if we want relationships that are healthy and are what God has created us to have within the connections we have with other people, we have to work to repair them. And yet when those emotions are running hot, when explosions are taking place, that's the moment we need to repair that connection. We shift from combat mode to connection mode, and that's really hard. So I'm going to share with you 5 ideas here that maybe help you to repair those relationships when you're in the midst of that tension and that conflict. And again, this is any relationship that we have. Here's the first thing. Name what's happening. It's okay to say in the middle of this argument, like, hey, this is getting heated. It's okay to say, hey, we're fighting each other and we're not attacking the issue. It's okay to call yourself out, like, hey, I'm getting kind of defensive right now in this moment. What we're doing is we're actually narrating what's taking place. We're narrating this conversation that we're having. And when we do that, we're actually beginning to control the conversation and move it in a healthy direction. Name what's happening. Second thing I would say is reaffirm the relationship. When you're in the midst of the battle, sometimes you forget about the other person and who they are to you. Reaffirm the relationship. Hey, we're on the same team. I care too much for you to see this escalate. I'm not against you. When our relationships feel secure, we like to soften the words that we say and what's happening. So reaffirm the relationship to help repair it. The third thing is take ownership of your part. Sometimes we just got to say, hey, I'm sorry. You know what? I just said that. I'm sorry. I said that. I shouldn't have said that. Or I interrupted you. That's not fair. I came in angry. Right? You ever had a conflict where you're already mad when you walk in? Yeah, sometimes we need to say, hey, I came in angry and I'm sorry. Maybe that's the time you say, hey, I need to pause for a second and get right. Ownership lowers the defenses faster than arguments will win it. And so make sure you take ownership of your part. Fourth thing, ask clarifying questions. This is one of my favorite. I've talked about this a lot. One of my favorite questions is help me understand. Right? Help me understand what you're saying. Help me understand what you're feeling. Help me understand what you're going through. What did you mean by that? Could you say that another way that helps me out? We often make assumptions in conflict. We're already trying to kind of fill in the story that's happening with the other person. But what we really need is clarity. Be curious in those moments. Ask questions to clarify where they're coming from. So take the time to do that. And then the last thing I would say is physical repair is so important. In any relationship it may be a touch on the arm. It's eye contact is really important in these moments. Relax your body. Because what our body's saying, like our mouth could be saying one thing, but our body is showing something else. And we need to make sure that there's this physical repair that's happening within this. Okay? Now, some of you are math whizzes and you love math equations. So let me give you a math equation that maybe will help make this a little bit easier. We're going to put this up on the screen. Repair equals own plus value plus clarify plus reset. Okay? What this means is if we want repairs in our relationships, you own your part. Because usually when there's two people, there's both of you have something to do with this. Value the other person. So key to this. Clarify where you are. And then lastly, reset the connection. Right? Repair what's there. The goal of conflict is not to win. The goal of conflict is to leave better connected than when you were when you first entered into that tension and that relationship. Listen, pause, repair. But I want to tell you the secret to all this. The secret of this is all this needs to be fueled by one thing. It needs to be fueled by love. There's a book in the New Testament called Ephesians. It's actually a letter a guy named Paul writes to this church, and he's talking about church unity. Well, if you think about it, the church is people, and so if he's talking about unity, he's talking about relationships that are broken and that there's some messiness in there. And so in Ephesians chapter 4, he's talking about how relationships can create disunity if we're not in the right frame of mind. But I love what he says in Ephesians 4:15. He says, instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ. When we're responding to the conflict in our relationships, if we want them to be repaired, if we want to have this connection long term with people, again, we say we know, we love, we care for, we've got to wrap this conversation, this time together up in that love and let it be fueled not by hate, not by anger, not by misunderstandings, but it needs to be fueled by love. Because here's what we know. When you're in relationships with people, there's always going to be conflict. Just part of the game. It's part of life. Every relationship we have, there's a pretty good chance that you and I will have conflicts in it. And the pressure is going to build up inside of us when there is that tension is there. And so the question isn't, will I feel it? The question is, will you react or will you respond? None of us want to be volcanoes, right? You don't want to be known as the person in your home. You don't want to be known as the person at school. You don't want to be known as the person on that ship. You don't want to be known as the person where you work in your office as the volcano. And everybody's kind of tiptoeing around, like waiting for this volcano to explode because they know the pressure is there. Nobody wants to be around you if that is you. But yet, in all of us, that pressure builds over time. And so we can choose to slow down. We can choose to show restraint. We can choose to respond with love. And I think we'll do that when we understand what's at stake. When we understand what's at stake if I take this step and I just go into reaction mode and I don't go into restraint and I don't look to respond in a healthy way. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to build a stronger relationship. We're not trying to break this relationship and make it worse. We want to build this relationship and make it stronger than it's ever been. And we can do that with love. But here's the beauty of all this. When we do this with love, and again, it's hard. When we do this with love, we can be more like Christ in our relationships. I want to go back to Jesus and Pilate for a second. As I was reading that this week, it's kind of like I like to do, and I ask you to do, is just kind of stick yourself within the events that are taking place. And here's Jesus. He probably just has a robe on, and that's it, nothing else. Like he's got this crown of thorns on his head. His body is incredibly bruised. He's bleeding profusely. Based on some scriptures, his face is probably unrecognizable at this point. He's been slapped and smacked and punched, and who knows what else has been done to him. And yet through everything that he's experiencing, when he could choose to escalate a situation that he would have every right to do, there's no hint of sarcasm. There's no emotional explosion. There's no reactive tone. In this pressure-filled moment, he shows restraint, compassion, and most importantly, he shows love. Because he knows one thing. He knows what's at stake. And what's at stake is this moment right here. That you and I get to celebrate this time of communion because Jesus was willing to say, I know what I could do, but I know what love is all about. And we know what we could do, but maybe we can hold on to a little bit of what we saw in Jesus and live that out in the relationships that we have and have that